for most of my life, I kept everything hidden because I didn't want the judgment from other people. And not just the judgment of me, but the judgment of whatever situation I was in.
Right.
You know, so a lot of people didn't know my story or what I was going through because I didn't want them judging him or her or anyone like that.
You gotta get uncomfortable, but get comfort.
There's some help. It ain't on the way. It's already waiting for you.
This little pill right here can take over your life. And I found that out the hard way. Mission statement of this podcast highlights stories of people that I've met in my journey in recovery. Hey guys, if you're listening to the podcast, if they're hearing this, they're obviously listening to the podcast, right? Right? If you're enjoying this podcast or you just want to support the podcast, make sure you subscribe on YouTube, turn on the notifications. Thank you for the support. So we're here with my friend Kathy. I recently met Kathy probably maybe a year and a half ago. And she's just like such an upbeat person, right? And she has some long-term recovery. And I've only been able to hear her story in tidbits, right? And so I'm excited to have you on here, right? I'm excited to learn a little bit more about you. And so, yeah, man, here's Kathy. How are you, Kathy?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for, like, first of all, being willing to do this. You know, I know it's a different feeling sitting here with a microphone in front of your face, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. So like, what's your clean date, Kathy?
May 10th, 1994.
So you just celebrated
29 years.
29 years. Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So like, what does that mean to you?
God, it's kind of like a rebirth. It was like a chance to start new.
Right. And so you shared with us before, right? Like you got clean at 19.
Yeah.
Right. So what's that like?
It was tough. It was tough because I remember going into rehab and thinking there's no way that I can be an alcoholic or an addict because I'm not even of legal age to drink yet.
Right.
You know, so it was different, and just the fears of like turning 21 and not being able to drink, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like the fear of missing out.
Right. And then the question of, did I have more time out there? You know, am I really an alcoholic?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, at 19, I mean, I'm really glad, even though that's a good decision, that I'm not stuck with any of the decisions I made at 19, right? So to make such a pivotal decision at 19, that's huge, right? So, like, let's go back. Like, I know, like, where we hang out with, we don't really, like, glorify the mess or, you know, all that stuff. But, like, what did life look like for you, Kathy? Like, what made, you know, and you can go back as far as you want, like to childhood or whatnot. But even to, yeah, so what did things look like for you growing up?
Well, growing up, I was the youngest of 4 kids. And the next oldest is 9 years older than I am. And so I was always known as the mistake.
Right.
My mom did not think she can get pregnant again, didn't think she can have any more kids, and here I am.
Right. And I'm the second born, and my dad always told me I was a mistake.
I think that great?
Right?
Makes you feel so loved.
Yeah, hey, but you know what? Like, honestly, I think we were all mistakes. All of those kids, right?
But they shouldn't tell you that.
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, what does that do? That start developing some sort of, like, you know, less than issues or, you know, like not being good enough, right?
I never felt wanted.
Right.
You know, and I know at one point, one of the neighbors even told my mom that when she was pregnant with me, she should have aborted me. And when I would do something bad, she would always go back to, God, I wish I would have done that.
Wow.
You know, and so I never felt like I should be here or that I belonged.
Right.
And as a kid, it's just heartbreaking, you know, to think that no one wants you.
Yeah, that's heavy. So, like, you still remember that?
I do.
Wow.
And I talked to my mom about it, and she doesn't.
Wow. Well, and you know what? Like in hindsight, like being a parent now, like I know, like I used to hold my parents accountable for so much, right? And then I see how short I fall on a daily basis, my own expectations as a parent, right? And even though it's not right, I start to get some of the things that they, some of the stuff that happened, like, oh, I get it, right? Like parenting isn't easy. But that comes it takes a long time, right? And as a kid, you don't know no better. Somebody's telling you you're not wanted, right? So does that start developing like a complex to where, like, I mean, what? This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Sorensen's Ace Hardware, located at 402 Washington Avenue in Los Banos, proudly serving the community since 1947. Please check out our friend at Sorensen's for all your hardware needs. Come on, guys, support those who support us. Thanks, Sorensen's. Sorensen's also has a Modesto location located at 1433 Coffee Road. Modesto, true value for all your hardware needs. For all of our people out in the Modesto area, please support those who support us. Thank you. This podcast is brought to you by our friend and realtor Naomi Townsend with Keller Williams Property Teams. She'll help you in every step of the way, whether you're buying or selling a home, commercial property, mobile home, or even a vacant lot. In the last few years, she's helped hundreds of families buy their dream homes in the Central Valley, Bay Area, Monterey, and even the Sacramento area. Check her Zillow profile where she has a perfect 5-star ranking. She is also bilingual in Spanish. In 2021, she was in the national top 2 in her brokerage. Please, guys, check out her Instagram, Sold by Naomi, or reach out to her at 408-623-1414. All the links are in the bio. Remember, guys, support those who support us. What does that lead to for you? I mean, obviously, that's important because it's the first thing that came up.
Yeah. It leads to a lot of sadness, a lot of always trying to do more to get people to love you.
Right.
And back to what you said about as a parent, I will tell you that I have children too. And what happened is at one point in my life, I lived through, one of my children drinking and using and stuff. And so I actually got more compassion and more empathy towards my mom because I lived through it.
Right. The shoe was on the other foot, right?
Right.
And so, like, let's go back to you being younger, because we'll get to all the recovery stuff, right, and all this stuff. So at what age do you start, like, does using and drinking become a thing for Kathy?
Well, at a young age, I remember my first drink was with my grandfather. And I was sitting on his lap, and he had like a gallon jug of Carlo Rossi, and he let me have a sip of it. And with that, it was like the first time like I felt like I belonged.
Right.
And it wasn't like that all like, I got drunk, I passed out, anything like that. It was just like that sense of belonging. And so after that, like my drinking, it would be like weddings. I would always go around the tables and get the half glass fulls of champagne,
Right.
And my first like real drunk, I remember, was like 5th grade, where I kind of like fell on the dance floor. It was the shoes.
Early.
It was the shoes.
It was the shoes.
It was the shoes. It had to be the shoes.
And it resonates. Like, I remember a guy sharing his story, and he talks about, like, I was addicted to, because he wanted acceptance so bad. Hey, will you do this with me? Right? Anybody that would say, hey, would you? And I just, when you talked about your grandfather, that just, I haven't thought about that in years, but it just rung in my head. So, like, acceptance was what you were looking for at a young age, and you found it with booze.
I found it with booze.
Right.
Because it made me someone that I didn't think I could be. It made me more confident. It made me talk to people. Because I was always an introvert and shy, and always afraid of what other people thought.
Right. And so, like, moving forward, does alcohol start to become the solution to all these problems that you were feeling, because it made you feel?
At some points it did.
Right.
I remember at one point in 8th grade, I had to move to a different city with my parents. And so it kind of took on a different meaning there. I would hang out with people that would drink more. And so, like, my mom was working at the time. So after school, we'd go get the alcohol and, we'd drink and go shopping, shoplifting. But at that point, I called it shopping.
The things you normalize, right?
Yeah, were shopping. We just weren't paying for
We
it.
just didn't have no money.
Yeah, I probably should make amends for that one, but we'll get there.
Yeah, you got time, right? And so, I mean, getting clean at 19, some stuff's got to happen pretty early to end up in treatment at 19. Like, what was the chain of events that led to that?
So I was drinking, I was what I called a weekend warrior.
Right.
Like, I'd drink at the parties like most teenagers do.
Yes.
I did not start doing drugs until like a month before graduation. So I was 17, and I remember I was too afraid to walk like during the ceremony. And so a month before, I'm like, okay, I can't drink because they'll know if I'm drunk, so I'm going to smoke weed. And so that was the first time I did that. And it was just a progression. I did that for a while, and then I got into the harder stuff. And what happened was I say this like in jest, but I was engaged to a married guy. I knew him for a weekend. I was living with him. I stayed a night at his house. But my mind is we were going to get married and everything was good. And what happened was some of my friends came to visit me. And the minute they left the house, they went to my mom's house and they're like, Kathy needs help.
Right.
And so I thought they were jealous. I thought they wanted my life. I'm like, who wouldn't?
Right.
And so what happened was my brother came, and at that point I was on unemployment from work, or not unemployment, but workman, like disability, because I had a hurt back. 19 with a hurt back. It was because I wasn't sleeping, but so what happened was he took me to the union and to look into getting into a rehab.
And so at that point, I got to imagine, like, I'm trying to get back into my 19-year-old brain, right? And though life was starting to get unmanageable, I don't know if I would have accepted that at that point. Like what does that look like? Like, what's your mind state going into rehab?
I was going for a vacation. That's what I was going for. I was going to get tan. I was going to meet some people. I was going to learn how to cook.
You must have went to a really nice rehab.
No, but this was my mentality.
Right.
They did have a pool.
Okay.
And they had a ping pong table. So I mean, that was my mentality, was like, I'm going on a 30-day vacation. I had no intention of staying clean.
Right. And so what happens in that treatment facility that changes that mentality? Because, I mean, you have to get a firm foundation to get clean at 19 and stay clean for 29 years. Like, that's a whole lot of time. You got more clean time than you have life before drugs.
Yes.
I wouldn't even say life using, but life before drugs. So, like, what are the chain of events that spark in your head? Like, hey, maybe this is a new way of life. Maybe this is what I need to be doing. Like, what clicks for Kathy?
What clicked was I saw what I could become if I continued on the path.
Right.
Because there were some lower bottom drunks and addicts that were in the rehab. And when I started listening to their stories and listening to where it started, I saw the pattern, and I saw that that's where I was, and just figuring that if I continued the way I was going, that I would end up like them.
Right. Well, and I mean,
which I feel bad saying sometimes, but it was like I did not want to be, an addict and an alcoholic. I did not want to end up like that.
Well, and obviously you are, and you were, because normal people don't see somebody that was shooting dope in their arm and be like, oh yeah, that's probably going to be me in a year if I keep doing what I'm doing, right? And I'm the same way. When I went to treatment, like, there was a lot of guys that went a lot deeper than where I was at, right? But I had certain privileges, I guess you could say, to where, like, security nets, right? And it didn't take long to start identifying, right? And like, holy shit, right?
Right.
If I would have taken a left when I should have taken a right, I'd be right there. And so, like, you recognizing, like, hey, this is where I'm heading, right? Mm-hmm. And like, where do you go from there? Because you said you went to a 30-day rehab, right? And so 30 days isn't a lot of time to change a whole lot of stuff. So what does it look like popping your head out? We call them a spin dry, right?
Right.
And so what does it look like when you get out? I mean, are you back to your
I went
married?
back to the guy.
Right.
The first day out of rehab, I went back there. and hung out with all my old friends and went and bowled and shot pool until 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Went back to my house, which really wasn't my house, but still. And woke up a couple hours later to them using in the kitchen.
Right.
And so what happened was I went back to my mom's house and I called the rehab and I asked if I can go back. And they said, we have a bed for one day if you want to come back. And so my brother took me, and that's where I learned, like, you know, go to some meetings, get a sponsor, work some steps, you know, that kind of thing. Because before I just heard, this is your new life, this is what you have to do, just, you know, go live it.
Right. And so, like, from that point forward, does like meeting attendance and the program start to become like an integral part of your life?
The first year it became my life.
Right.
You know, I was going to marathon meetings. I was hitting 3 meetings a day, building relationships within the meetings. But it kind of went downhill in my mind, you know. I had a good friend, found him. You know, they say don't get in a relationship the first year. I didn't listen to that suggestion, you know, so I found the new him.
Right.
And, you know, my story is a little bit different because what happened was I fell in love. He fell in love with my best friend. They got together. And so my meetings tapered off and I
Right.
stopped going. And I found the new him.
And so, and that's like, I was always worried. I was always warned, I should say, you know, that a person could just be a bag of dope with skin in it, right? And we can use a lot of things besides drugs. Mm-hmm. And so, like, but like having that like relationship, I mean, that pushes you away from recovery, right?
Right.
And so you're staying clean in spite of it.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
Well, I found a new him to focus on.
Right.
You know, and got pregnant and got married and started living that life.
Right. And that's amazing because I know women in my own life, right? And I don't want to share too much of this because it's not my story to tell, but that
we can make it your story.
right?
It's
It's actually part of my story, but I don't want to get in trouble. But that have gotten pregnant, put everything down, right? And just lived for that. You know, that's something greater than themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to me, right? Just because, like me, I want to hedge my bets, right? I stay plugged in. Like, I've tried it on my own. It didn't work very well. Right? So how long do you stay clean, you know, pushing forward? Like, I mean, obviously you're still clean, but, like, in that process, what does life look like? Is it chaotic? Is it...
In the beginning, it wasn't. You know, he told me he was a normie, which it turned out he really wasn't. So that marriage lasted 4 years. And then... divorced him and moved on to the next one.
Right.
And this one was a self-proclaimed alcoholic, so I'm like, this one will be easy to fix. This one, you know?
Right.
The writing was on the wall. I'm going to fix him.
And so that seems to be the process, right? Is it starts like some relationship hopping and like, so I mean, like, what does that look like? I mean, like, I don't see, I don't know. 'Cause I got divorced in rehab and then I got back in the same relationship and I've been in that relationship forever. So I don't know what it is to have like, not feel comfortable in the rooms because the relationship changes. And then have this I don't know if I would have stayed clean if I'd have went through 2 or 3 breakups and new relationships, right? Like, so what's keeping you clean?
Different things,
Right.
you know, the kids, him, you know, a little bit of self-worth, you know, just a little bit of hope.
Right.
You know, that's what kept me clean. And in that marriage, I had to be responsible. You know, I had to take care of everything. You know, and what does it look like? It was chaotic. It was a mess.
Right.
You know, but changing things, hoping that it's going to get better.
Yeah, because parenting is chaos, right? Like I know with the tools of recovery, parenting is chaos, right? And so I couldn't imagine being out there, you know, having this issue that we have and also trying to go through all these life things with no support, right?
Right.
And so, man, you're a stronger person than I. I'll tell you that. And I seen your kids. I met your kids randomly by chance at Great America right? And we end up right next to each other in line, and you have happy kids. So you're doing it right. You're doing a good job.
Well, they're happy in public.
Oh, okay.
So it's all good.
Right. That's all we
It's
ask
all
for them.
good. Yeah.
So what does life look like? I mean, so for you, I know you're plugged back in. Like, what was the process to where you said, hey, man, I better start hedging my bets and really getting plugged back in with recovery?
About 7 years ago, my marriage was over. And what happened was I emotionally shut down. I was still married to him, but I just kind of blocked out everything and just emotionally shut down. He actually made it into the rooms in January of 2017. But in March, something happened to my daughter that I did not know if she was going to live through it. And I'm grateful that I emotionally checked out prior, because I don't know if I would have lived through going through that. But what happened was one day I went and visited her, and she wouldn't see me. And like I said, I didn't know if she was going to live. And I'm driving back home, and I'm just like bawling and just praying. And, then it hit me. It's like, go back to the rooms and find someone that has her story so you can introduce them and they can fix her.
Right.
And that was my whole mentality, was like, I'm going to go to meetings so I can find someone that I can introduce to my daughter and they'll fix her, and then my life will be good. And what happened was I started going to meetings and I started listening, and I realized that I was the one that needed help.
Right. Well, it's a program of attraction, right? It doesn't matter what attracts you there, right? As long as you're there.
Right.
And so, like, you have like a couple different segments. You have like real early recovery where you're real plugged in, then you have this big space, and then getting plugged back in. What does life look like without the supported recovery versus life now where you're plugged in and you have a support group and all these things?
I haven't had a mental breakdown since I've been plugged in again. So
Imagine
that's
that,
good.
right?
I know. I can actually talk to people. For most of my life, I kept everything hidden because I didn't want the judgment from other people. And not just the judgment of me, but the judgment of whatever situation I was in.
Right.
So a lot of people didn't know my story or what I was going through because I didn't want them judging him or her or anyone like that.
So it's basically a life filled with secrets. Right. And like we always say, we're only as sick as our secrets.
And it was all in my head, trying to figure out everything. And so I came back into the rooms at 23 years sober, and I was shaking like a newcomer. Like, people would introduce me and they're like, how much time do you have? And I'm like, tell them. And they're like, you're so full of shit, They're like, oh, honey, it's okay,
Well, I gotta imagine that's a whole different dynamic too, because then people are questioning you, then you're questioning their attentions, and then it's this whole side. And you said living inside your head, so you're used to this already. So, I mean, what stops that from pushing you out again?
I was grateful for it, because I'm one that doesn't like to talk to people.
Right.
So with them thinking I was a newcomer and coming in and introducing themselves, it started to make me feel like I belonged.
Right.
And got me more comfortable. And so it kind of just gave me that foundation to start working off of.
Right. And so what happens when you re-enter the rooms and you start doing the work? How does life start changing again for you?
Drastically,
right.
Because for most of my life, I didn't have that self-love. It was always about someone else. If they loved me, then I'm okay. If they criticize me, then there's something wrong with me. And most of my life, I lived just changing whoever I was to fit whoever I was with.
Right.
And I became an extension of them. And so this time in recovery, when I'm doing it, it's like for me. Yeah, it's like making me happy, and so the recovery is more for me now.
Right. And that's the whole, because that's the only way this thing works, right? Is when we do it for ourselves, right? And as a result, we end up being able to help other people. And so this example that you're now showing, does this end up changing things with your daughter?
Her and I have a great relationship now.
Right.
I did find out from her, the divorce between her dad and I hurt her, at one point, because I gave up we shared custody, but he had her more time. And I did it to avoid fighting. But her feelings and her thoughts was that I didn't want her. Right. And so I just gave her away. And so we've been able to have those kind of conversations, and now her and I are best friends. And part of it is because I stopped controlling her. I stopped trying to control her because I never could.
Right. Well, I'm sure you can identify with the feelings she's feeling, because what you shared earlier about some of your first memories of your mom, in a different way, we end up repeating the cycle if we're not actively looking into our past and trying to see so do you guys identify on that level as well?
Sometimes,
right.
I know from going through what I went through, it made me understand my mom more. Right. And it's funny because when I first got into recovery, I made an amends to her. But it was kind of a half-assed amends. It was like, yeah, I'm sorry for what I did, even though you messed up even more, Yeah. And so after this, situation happened, and the feelings that I felt and how I felt out of control, I may not have said the same things, but I felt it.
Right.
And so I was able to go make a more heartfelt amends to her because I understood why she did it. Because as parents, we don't know. They don't give you any kind of book, and every kid is different. So what works for one may not work for another.
Right. And I'm living that. I have 2 kids that couldn't be more different. Mm-hmm. Right. And so what worked with the first one doesn't work with the second one. And it's like relearning this thing all over again. Mm-hmm. Right. And the whole thing that I try not to do is add more. Right. Because I've already done enough. Right. Especially with the oldest one. I know there was a certain segment of her life where she remembers me being chaotic and all these things happening. And these things affect us, but even if we don't know that they affect us, right? And it only mm-hmm. takes deep digging to figure that out, right? So what does life look like for you right now, Kathy? At this point, with recovery, 29 years in, how many children do you have?
I have 3.
3. And I'm assuming one's older than the 2 I seen you with.
Yeah, I have a 26-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 13-year-old.
So you went all the way through it. Now you're going back through it, and then you got a young one coming up. Right?
Oh, yeah. I really thought this one out.
All right.
That was some good planning on my side.
Hey, well, it happens. It's life.
But I did plan them.
Right? That's it, right?
They are loved and they are wanted.
Right. And that's the main thing, right? Is that we can express love today, without condition, right? Mm-hmm. And you know what? Life just happens.
Right.
So what does it look like for you managing 3 kids? I know you just got off work to get here, mm-hmm. Trying to balance your recovery. So how does life look like today for Kathy?
It's a lot easier when I'm not in a relationship.
Right.
I've been divorced for 2 years now, and so it's a lot easier. Just work. With the kids, since I only have them half and half, I still have me time.
Right.
Which is different because, my whole life I was never alone. I went from my mom's house to marriage to the next marriage, to my mom's house, so it's this is the first time that I'm by myself.
Right. So you're really getting a chance to know yourself. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's crazy because I know what it is to have a chaotic house, right, with kids around and everything going on. And when my wife and kids leave for 2-3 days, I don't know what to do with myself, right?
Right.
I better go to a meeting or something, right? So what's this process looking? Because when I see you walk into where we hang out, and I see you, and you look like a strong, independent woman that doesn't mind being by herself, right? And so that's the image I get. Mm-hmm. Is that how it is today?
Today it is.
Right.
2 years ago it wasn't.
So what were the steps you took to get from there to here?
I couldn't tell you.
Right.
It just, over time, it just happened. I think part of it is also just being more okay with who I am. And learning about myself and knowing that, you know, because my whole life it was like I would base like on my past, like, you know, and the feelings that I had. And being able to do the action and to do it, it kind of builds up the confidence a bit, like, you know what, I can do this.
Right.
You know, because I was one that always run from fear. You know, something like this would have made me drink. You know, just coming out here and talking to someone, I'd be like, oh.
Right. Well, and you got a story to tell, right? Like somebody's living your story at some point right now, or at multiple points, right? And so like getting this out there, you know, because like a lot of the people we talk to, even the way my program might get 90% of the people loaded, right? But the way I'm doing it, somebody can identify with that, right? Mm-hmm. So like I think it's important for people to understand that you can get clean and stay abstinent for a long period of time, just going through life, and it's okay to come back, mm-hmm. right? And you can even from that point forward start doing some work you haven't done and become okay with yourself, right? Because that's the biggest hurdle that any of us face is like, can you sit in a room by yourself and be okay with yourself? Mm-hmm. And that's hard.
I just got, like, for my sobriety birthday, I actually went on a road trip by myself.
Right.
And I didn't drive myself crazy in the 5.5 hour drive. And I was like, wow, you know, because I can drive to Walmart and I can be 30 years in the past and 20 years in the future in that 5-minute drive.
Right.
You know, and like, so for me to drive that far and like be okay and not be future tripping or, you know, worrying about what I did.
So did you celebrate yourself for your clean birth date?
I did. Well, as much of a celebration it was, but
yeah,
you know, it was just me by myself, not having to appease or worry about anyone else. So it was nice.
Right. And I'm one of those people too. Like when I go like to chair a meeting or something, I don't need to bring 5, 6, 7, 8 people with me. I enjoy just going by myself, mm-hmm. right, and just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And today I'm okay like that. Like there was a time, clean, where I didn't trust myself being by myself, right? Because at times when I was alone with myself, I was my own worst enemy.
Right.
So I get it, right? I get it, and that's such a freeing feeling to be able to drive down the street and know that your intentions are in the right place. Mm-hmm. So, like, what is like the biggest thing for you as far as your recovery goes? Like what's the biggest thing that has given you at this point in your life?
Probably self-love.
Right.
You know, and acceptance. You know, acceptance of myself and acceptance of other people too.
You want to elaborate?
Before I would like look at people and I'd be like, why are they doing that? You know, they shouldn't do that.
Right.
You know, and just judgmental, you know, because that wasn't the life that I agreed with. And because I've had to go through different trials and tribulations, it's given me empathy more towards them. And so it's like anyone tells me a story, it's like, you know, I get it.
Right.
And it's not like, well, why don't you just try something different? You know, which is usually what it would be. You know, I know when I was married to an alcoholic, I'd be like, well, why can't you just get sober? I did it. You know, and I didn't understand the disease.
Right.
Even though I knew it was a disease, but because I was able to stop, you know, I thought he just could. You know, and so seeing that side of it, it's made me understand people more.
And how did you make it through that sober? You know, like going through a relationship and not being completely plugged in and having that going on in your home, like what kept you sober through that?
Responsibility. I had to take care of what I could. You know, and I will tell you, part of it is pride. You know, it's like once you get some time, it's like you don't want to give it up.
Right.
You know, and I mean, pride can be a defect, but it can also be an attribute. You know, fear is the same way.
Right. Well, and that's what like, I lost my train of thought. Like going through all that stuff, and having that, like the disease right in front of your face. I mean, that's difficult. And I see why that relationship would have to end, You know, because I don't know if I can do that and make it out clean, right?
I was with him for 20 years. So it took me a while.
Right. Would you like to say that if during that time, if you were plugged in, that might not have been, that probably wouldn't have been 20 years?
It probably wouldn't have, but I wouldn't change any of it.
Right.
You know, because I do have my kids. And I think I had to go through everything I went through to get where I am now.
Exactly.
You know, and today I'm good with who I am.
Right.
And, you know, that's kind of what matters. You know, that's the most important thing to me. You know, and I mean, I can look back and I can be like, well, fuck, you know, I could have done better, you know, but life isn't like time limit. You know, it's not like I have to do something by these certain times.
Right. And we're masters of that. Like looking, you know, because I always do that too. Because the first time I cleaned, I was 24, and I'm like, man, if I would have just, you know, the woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? And all that does is kill you inside, right? And like what you said is so true. You had to go through what you had to go through to get where you're at now, right? And so, like, what would be like a bit of advice for somebody that's like, say they're going through, because I got to imagine a lot of stuff comes along with a relationship like that, right? Where you're dating somebody that's completely stuck in their disease, right? And I'm sure there's somebody that's listening to it. Like, what kind of advice would you give to somebody that's dealing with that?
You know, the only advice I can give is do what's best for them.
Right.
You know, because we all have to live our own story.
Yeah.
You know, I know with me, if people would have, you know, because I know before I got into these relationships, I'd be like, oh, if he ever does this, I'm out.
Right.
You know, and then that would happen. I, you know, kind of move the boundary a little. Well, if he does this, you know, that's not so bad. You know, but I had to do that for me, you know, because I had to be able to look at myself in the mirror afterwards and be like, I tried my hardest. You know, so my only advice is, you know, for people to just look within and, you know, what really makes them happy.
Right.
You know, and I mean, my advice to anyone, if you're not happy where you're at, change something.
Right.
You know, you don't have to do like a drastic change and change everything, but change something and you might get a different result.
Right. Well, that's what, like, you know, because my wife went through so much with me, right? And I think I'm one of the rare ones where I actually changed it, and to this point it's stuck, right? And a lot of people were looking at her like, just leave that dude, right? And I like to say that we're happier now than we've ever been. Of course, there's with relationships and kids and all that stuff, there's so much stuff going on. So I know it from the other side. I was that guy, right? But from this side, it's so interesting, you know, because love is a great motivator, right? And we can put the blinders on for somebody that we love until we can't, right? And she had to put that boundary down for me. And I think that's what got me clean. That was because I would look at myself and I'm dying, right? I'm dying because of this disease. But as long as I had all this around me, I'm okay, right?
Right.
Everything
looks good.
Yeah.
Looks good on the outside.
Right. And like you said, we're such a victim of basing what we think about ourselves on other people's opinions. So as long as it looks good on the outside, we're okay. Right. So I get it. Like, I really get it. So like, say that there's somebody like listening to this podcast, right? And they're struggling in one form or another. Like, what sort of advice would you give somebody like that? You know, they might not know how to get clean, or they may be clean and suffering, right? And long-term abstinence. They don't have the recovery tools in their belt. Like, what would you tell somebody?
Just to try something different,
Right.
you know, if they're not in recovery, if they haven't given it up, you know, try.
Right.
You know, I've heard too many stories where, you know, people just give up, you know, and they don't come back. You know, and for me, life is, you know, I mean, the most important thing is that I'm still breathing. You know, no matter how I mess up, you know, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm not perfect in recovery. I am not perfect.
I get it.
You know, but I'm still alive. So there's always that opportunity to make up for it. You know, and anyone that's hurting, just ask for help.
Right.
You know, take that first step and ask for help.
And I think that's the hardest thing for people like us, is just to ask for help. You know, we had a guy on here say, you know, there's somebody waiting to help you. Just a matter of asking for that help. Right? Is there anything that you feel that we missed out on while we were talking that you want to share?
It's funny how you were saying how you wish you would have gotten it earlier.
Right.
I used to come into these rooms and think, God, I wish I would have hit a bigger bottom. And so it's funny how some people will look at me and be like, she had it made because she got it so young. But I had my own issues to deal with, because I hadn't hit that bottom. I'm like, am I really one? And trust me, I am. I can see it through my shopping, through my eating, through all that stuff that I'm an addict.
Right.
But there was always that question, and I would look at them and I'd be like, God, I wish I would have hit a bigger bottom. And what I learned is that we can't judge our lives on other people's lives. As long as we can look ourselves in the mirror and be okay with everything, that's what matters.
Right.
What anyone else thinks, that's on them.
Well, and that's it. Like, your bottom's when you're done digging, right? And only an addict would say, man, I wish my bottom was worse.
Oh my God, I would hear these stories about people going to prison. I'm like, I want that.
Right.
Like, I never got a DUI. I'm like, why not?
Right.
I was like so upset. It was like my story wasn't good enough. And I felt that way a lot. Like, I didn't want to share my story because it didn't have like all that wreckage and all that fun stuff, what I think is fun stuff.
Right.
But I learned that there are some people that don't have that and they may need to hear my story. And it's funny because in the past like 6 years, I've met like 3 different people that stopped going to meetings for 20 years and are still sober.
Right.
So it's out there.
Well, it's funny you say that because it took me till I was like 23 to get my DUI, and shit, I was using since I was 12, driving since I was 16. So it took me 5 years to get a DUI. So don't worry about it. Doesn't mean you didn't do it right, right? And I have the same thing, right? Like, I'll sit in a meeting and I'm like, shit, I didn't smoke crack, under a bridge. Maybe I'm not an addict, right? And that's the disease, right? And only an addict or an alcoholic would sit there and listen to it and be like, man, I wish I shot heroin in a dumpster, right? Like, that's not how normal people think.
Right. I remember when Zima came out again, I'm like, man, I got sober when Zima was cool. Well, it was never cool, but when it was out the first time, it was like, fuck. And then like all the different drinks, I'm like, what? I missed out.
Right. And that's the disease working in our lives, right? Like, I remember I'm sitting there at my house and I'm watching Intervention, right? And I'm like watching this whole mess, right? And this person's life is, they're at their bottom, whether they recognize it or not, right? And they're sitting in a trap house, and it's fucking disgusting. And they shoot some dope, right? And I never shot dope before, but I know the feeling of an opiate taking over you, right? I know the feeling of that heroin release, right? And I see him just fall into that, and it looked appealing to me for a second. Right. And that's when I was like, oh boy, I better get to a meeting. Right.
Right.
Because at that moment, I didn't see all the chaos around. I just seen that fall over him. And I felt that. And I remember that. Right. And sometimes my disease will show me that, and it won't show me on my hands and knees crying. Right. And I've learned to play out the tape. And so I'm grateful for that today, because our minds could tell us some crazy ass stuff.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now, you belong, Kathy.
I know I do. I know.
So you think we hit everything? You got anything else you want to share?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think I'm good.
Well, I just appreciate you doing this, you taking your time and sitting, because I know it's not comfortable.
How can you tell the shaking?
It's not comfortable for any of us, right? To sit down in front of a camera and a microphone and talk about our truth.
Wait,
right?
there's a camera on us?
Yeah, the whole time.
Oh, nice. You could have told me that before.
Am I surprised?
I know.
About the big
You're like,
guy.
you're on Candid Camera.
The guy with the huge shoulders holding a camera. Didn't trigger that?
Nope.
All right, Kathy, well, you owe me a hug. The thing always ends with a hug. Just don't trip. And we didn't even need the tissues.
I know. I did good.